This is the Comics Alternative Manga, reviews of Happiness and My Brother's Husband. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Manga. I'm Derek.
And I'm Shea.
And we're two guys who absolutely love to talk about manga. And on the April manga episode, we're going to be looking at some recent titles. We're going to begin with a series that's been going on for a few months. Shuzo Oshimi's Happiness, the latest volume of that, number 4, comes out this week, in fact. And then after that, we're going to look at Gengoro Tagame's My Brother's Husband, Volume 1. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Manga is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But often, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
In the month of April, you can get the Viz 2-in-1 volumes of Mitsuru Adachi's Cross Game for 30% off, and you can also get books like Nijigahara Holograph by Inio Asano for 30% off.
Oh, yes, and we've talked about that book on the podcast a few times. Definitely something that should check out. And, you know, that's all the more reason for people to go to dcbservice.com, because there you're going to find every single month great discounts on comics and your favorite manga. And a great place to discover manga, for that matter. So go to dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Shea and Derek sent you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Shea, how has the month of April been wrapping up for you?
It has been good. I have been slowly making my way through Julio Cortázar's Blow Up and other stories, and that has been a real treat to read. Few things I enjoy more than a truly excellent book. So the last week or so of April has been pretty good to me. What about you?
Well, it's the end of the semester, so exams are next week. That basically describes what my past couple of weeks have been like. End of the semester wrap up.
That's always fun.
Yep. But, you know, since you and I did our last podcast, we have gotten some responses through various social media means that I'd like to share with the listeners. And in fact, one was a tweet we got from Anna Verasimo, and she is one of the creators of I guess now a completed Kickstarted project called STEM Heroes. And if you go to Kickstarter and look up STEM Heroes, you'll see that this was a project for a work of manga. This is for the first volume, dealing with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, primarily from a woman's perspective with female protagonists, right? Mm-hmm. So the emphasis is all on science, technology, engineering, and math, with women primarily involved. And in fact, Verasimo is a scientist herself, and she tweeted out to us that this is something that we may be interested in. She said, scientific literacy is urgently needed. STEM Heroes manga is here to help. So, Anna, thank you very much for alerting us to this. It's worth checking out. Now, again, this project has already completed, but if you want to find out more information about it, go to Kickstarter and look for STEM, S-T-E-M, Heroes, and you will surely find it. We also got some more messages via YouTube. Now, Shea, if you remember last month, we read a message from someone who responded to our show from a couple of months ago where we looked at Ghost in the Shell and Revolutionary Girl Utena. And this individual left a message via our YouTube channel because we have our episodes up on YouTube as well. I mentioned then, and I'll mention now, that it seems that our YouTube videos of the podcast, especially the manga, seem to get a lot of traffic, and a lot of people comment on those. Well, over the past couple of weeks, we have two other people who have commented on that same show, the one from 2 months ago where we did Revolutionary Girl, Utena, and Ghost in the Shell. And one is from someone whose handle is Baxter1999. And Baxter1999 writes, Kunihiko Ikehura and Yoji Enokido, both responsible for the famous aesthetic and style of the Sailor Moon anime back in the 90s, left the production of Sailor Moon in order to create their own anime. There were a lot of ideas going around at the time, including a mecha series and also an action series involving a team similar to the Sailor Scouts. When more definitive ideas were evolving, the Bipappas group formed, joining Chihiro Sato, who actually drew concept art for those previous ideas. Although she wrote the story of the manga, the key concepts are original from Ikuhara and Enokido. So Baxter1999 is responding to some queries that you and I had on that episode. So thank you, Baxter1999, for the response. And then at about the same time, a YouTuber by the name of Isabel W. also chimed in, and Isabel wrote, "Sorry if this is a bit late, seeing as the Utena manga has already been released, but I hope to get it soon. But I came to know about the franchise through Steven Universe, and I've seen the anime and read the manga online, and yeah, it's pretty great, and I can see the influence it has on SU." Steven Universe. Pearl and Rose Quartz are obvious references to Utena and Anthe. I read somewhere that during the production of the anime, there was a big dispute between Sato and Ikehara about how the series would handle Utena and Anthe's relationship, to the point where Sato threatened to leave production if they ended up being a couple, which was never her intention. Eventually, they came to a compromise and had the relationship be ambiguous. So really, one can say that Utena and Anthe were or weren't romantically involved with each other, and either view wouldn't be wrong, which is much better than having it appeal to one side only. So Isabel W., thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And again, she's answering a query that you and I had on that episode about the strangeness and the ambiguity of the relationship between Utena and Anthe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad she brought up its connections to Steven Universe, which I don't think I did in that episode, but I had meant to. The kind of allusions to that series that I've picked up on from other contemporary cartoons, American and Japanese. So I'm glad that she did that as well.
So do you watch Steven Universe?
I do watch Steven Universe. My fiance Nicole is probably a bigger fan of it than I am, but I try to keep up with it, and I enjoy it quite a bit. Yeah.
You read the comic?
The Steven Universe comic, I think I've read a couple issues of it, but I have not done a very good job of keeping up with it.
See, I'm familiar with neither, or at least I know they exist. I just haven't watched or read it.
Well, the cartoon's pretty good. I enjoy like I said, I enjoy the cartoon quite a bit. It's funny, and it's full of allusions to weird 90s anime that the target audience for Steven Universe probably should not be watching, like Neon Genesis Evangelion. But yeah, it's a fun little cartoon. I definitely recommend it.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and begin discussing the first title that we have on our plate for April, and this is Shuzo Oshimi's Happiness. This is coming out from Kodansha Comics, and we have, as of this week, 4 volumes translated into English. That one came out, like I said, just the other day. And this was originally serialized in Besatsu Shonen magazine beginning in the March 2015 issue. So were you aware of either the Happiness series or Shuzo Oshimi's work before we prepared for this episode?
Yeah, I had no idea what this comic was. I didn't know anything about it. But I interact sometimes with Sarah Horrocks on Twitter. And she's a cartoonist and she writes about comics. And I was kind of aware of it and aware of Oshimi because she is a big fan of his work. And she likes to kind of live tweet her readings or live Instagram her readings of certain comics. And so I had seen, panels and pages, and I'd heard the name of Happiness before. And, I like the look of it. I thought the art was really striking. So when you mentioned talking about it on the show, I was like, oh, that comic looks really terrific. I would love to really get a chance to read that. But I really did not have any clue what the series was about. And so when it reveals itself as this kind of vampire comic, I was a little taken aback. But what about you? I know you were the one who kind of mentioned us talking about it, but did you have any real familiarity with the concept or with Oshimi before we got a Reddit for this show?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I had not heard about it before I saw it listed and recommended to me on Amazon. And I can't remember. This was at some point last year. I was, looking at something or ordering something. I can't remember what it was. But, Amazon has the algorithms to where they'll recommend other things. If you like this, then you may like something else. And the first volume of Happiness came up, and I looked at the cover, and it was quite striking. And so I thought, okay, this looks interesting. And the way it's described is as kind of a suburban vampire narrative, right? With young people. And so, okay, it's interesting. It's put out by Kodansha, and we have talked about Kodansha Comics quite a bit on this on this podcast. And, I feel like it's difficult to go wrong with Kodansha. I mean, there may be certain things that are outside of my taste, but it's still good for what it is. And so I thought I'd recommend it to you and see if it resonated. It did. So I did a little digging into him and found out that one of the series that he's well known for is the Flowers of Evil. And so I looked at a little bit of that. I really didn't read all the way through the first volume, but had you known about that series?
Yeah. Like I said, I know Sarah Horrocks is a big fan of his, and she has tweeted about that series as well. So like Happiness, I didn't really know too much about it, but I know that she had talked about it and she had tweeted out pictures of it. So, I was kind of vaguely aware of it, and I knew that was the thing he was kind of best known for, at least in the United States. But I didn't know that much about it. I didn't really know what it was about or even how long it was. Just I'd seen kind of like bits and pieces of it from her Twitter account.
Now, in trying to encapsulate what this series is, or at least the first 4 volumes of the series that we've read, I think you would do well to look at the back of the first volume in the blurb, because it basically sums up things pretty well. It says, nothing interesting is happening in Makoto Okazuki's first year of high school. His life is a series of quiet humiliations, low-grade bullies, unreliable friends, and the constant frustration of his adolescent lust. But one night, a pale, thin girl knocks him to the ground in an alley and offers him a choice. Now, everything is different. Daylight is scaringly bright, food tastes awful, and worse than anything is the terrible consuming thirst. The tiny shames of his own life have been replaced by 2 towering horrors, the truth of what will slate his awful craving in high school itself. And so without coming right out on the back cover blurb and mentioning vampiric, you kind of get the clues there. What this is about.
Yeah, and I think it does a good job of getting really into that. Within the first chapter, you get a strong sense of the kind of high school youth dynamic as well as the more supernatural elements. They're all kind of worked in there by the end of that first chapter.
Right. And, there's more texture that moves throughout the first 4 volumes than what I just read. But that basically encapsulates what we've seen so far. So now, just recently, you and I recently as in today, as we're recording this, you and I got a copy of the 4th volume of Happiness. And so both of us have read this. And where they are in the series, and again, we don't deal with spoilers on the Comics Alternative, so we don't want to give anything away. But the main character, Okazaki, has not yet left his community, his hometown. And there have been hints that he would do so with, the character that I read in the blurb, the woman who knocks him down and changes things is someone of vampire by the name of Nora. And so Nora has in previous volumes asked Okazaki to just go away with her. And we don't know for what purposes or exactly why. This is slowly being teased out. But even by the 4th volume, they haven't left yet. Although I think to some degree quite a bit has happened across the 4 volumes that have come out. One of those is that, Okazaki has turned. I don't think they call it turning in the book, but he basically has come to realize that he is a vampire, that he has been affected, and it's his coming to terms with that. Also, a friend of his by the name of Yuuki has also become a vampire, although the way that Okazaki deals with his turning and the way that Yuuki is dealing with his are vastly different. Now, some may argue that I'm dealing in spoilers here by suggesting that Yuuki has turned, and perhaps so, if you limit yourself, let's say, to just that first volume. But I think it's in, volume 2, that Yuuki is bitten, and so either that he's going to turn or he's going to die. But I think he's mentioned in blurbs on back of other volumes, and so we know he doesn't die, but he does become a vampire. But the interesting thing is how he has become a friend of Okazaki's, but both of them are dealing with their situation in what seems to be very different ways, although we don't know exactly to what extent Yuuki will take his new powers or his new abilities. Although in the 4th volume, things turn really dark. Let's just say that. Yeah,
I think Yuuki and Okazaki serve as really good foils for one another. And I think the way that Oshimi kind of builds Yuki's characters over those first 2 volumes is really interesting because it's not super clear kind of what his role in the series is going to be, but that kind of weird sort of friendship that he develops with Okazaki in the series really functions as a good foundation for his role in the series after he becomes a vampire. His character is really, really interesting, and I wasn't really sure what Oshimi was going to do with him until kind of that 4th volume when you start to see a lot of him as a vampire. And he becomes a really, really interesting, strange character that I really, really would like to see more of.
Right.
In fact, you mentioned that volume 4 just came out today, and this is a series that I would really like to, if there were like 10 or 15 of these are out already that we could have gotten through to talk about. I really would like to read the next few volumes, but unfortunately Kodansha is completely caught up with the Japanese edition, so we have to slowly wait for more volumes to come out to find out what's going to happen here. But I think few series we've talked about on the show have me kind of eager and anxious to follow along with like this one.
Yeah, and you said that you really can't wait until the next couple of volumes.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to wait until, I
Yeah.
think, July for Volume 5, and then according to Amazon, December for Volume 6. So by the end of the year, you'll have 2 more volumes, but that's all. Now, I agree with you. I think that Oshimi did some really interesting things with Yuuki, his character, and complicating him. But I think he becomes even more complicated in an interesting way even before he becomes a vampire, because the way that the relationship between Okazaki and Yuuki begins is in the first volume. I mean, it seems like I guess we could call it a typical power move in terms of being bullied, right? Where Yuuki and his girlfriend Neo are, along with other kids, they're popular, or they seem to be popular, and they take advantage of the less popular or the nerdy members of their high school class. And Okazaki and his friend Nunoda are 2 of those kind of nerdy individuals. And basically what Yuuki and the others have them do is to buy them lunch. So at lunchtime, instead of Okazaki and his friend Nunota enjoying their own lunch, then these guys say, hey, you know what I would really like right now? Is, a such and such sandwich or some sushi or, a can of coffee. Go get it for me. And they don't even give them the money, right? So these guys have to pay for the popular crowds, the bullies crowds, lunch. And you think automatically that Yuuki is going to be someone that, of course, we're supposed to hate. But where the complication begins to come in is once Okazaki is bitten, he changes and his behavior changes, and at first he doesn't realize it. So right after getting bitten, he lands in the hospital, he comes back, and Yuuki is asking him to get something for him. Go get lunch for me, boy. And instead of getting it, what Okazaki does is he whacks him in the nose. And if he doesn't break his nose, and I think he does break his nose, right? Because he has to wear a bandage for a while. And it's at that point that Yuuki he's basically cowed. And he becomes much more passive and non-aggressive, to the point that the other bullies in class make fun of Yuuki and bully him. And so Okazaki feels bad about that, and so he takes up at one point for Yuuki when he's being bullied by using the powers that he, as of yet, doesn't know how to control. Yuuki, though, becomes grateful, and this is how Yuuki and Okazaki become friends, or at least become closer. And so it's the fact that Yuuki can turn from a bully to someone who can empathize with being bullied is I think an interesting turn. And then that turn is given a further twist once Yuuki is bitten and he discovers that he has powers as well. And so it's interesting. We're at the point now that, Yuuki can go one direction, he can go another direction. We don't know yet, but as these next 2 or 3 volumes may show, we'll see how his character continues to evolve and to become complicated.
Yeah, I mean, that whole 4th volume, there's this kind of, he has this like weird obsession with his mother that you kind of get a glimpse of in volume 2 and a little in volume 3. But I'd really like to see how that kind of, that strange kind of fixation manifests itself, or how Oshimi plays that aspect of his character now that it's kind of married to this weird supernatural power. Like I said, he's a really interesting foil for Okazaki, and I'm really, really curious to see what Oshimi does with the relationship between those 2 characters.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned Yuki's attitudes or his ideas about his mother. Yeah, that's really interesting, because in this 4th volume, and again, without giving anything away, it does involve to a large degree his girlfriend Neo and her parents. And the mother does come into play. Yuki's mother and his attitude, his thoughts about her come into play in what happens in a kind of strange, almost Freudian way.
Hmm. Yeah, there's, you mentioned the events of Volume 4, and without giving too much away, one of the most striking things about the series kind of thematically is the way Oshimi explicitly kind of interweaves the erogenous and the morbid or the violent. And I think that really hits a kind of zenith in that fourth volume with Yuki's character.
Right.
As this character that kind of he wholeheartedly kind of like pushes those things together, and they kind of worm their way into each other in his brain. And that makes for some really really interesting volume. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is, I'm really excited to see what he does with that. Like I said, these four volumes, I think Oshimi does such a good job of building these themes and these characters that I'm just really excited to see kind of where he takes them and how he develops these things further, both the relationship between Okazaki and Yuuki and their characters individually, as well as this kind of weird mythology we get kind of hints of towards the I think Volume 4 is when we really start to see it. And then thematically, there's just such a rich space that I think Oshimi is creating, and I'm very, very anxious to see what he does with that.
Right. Another character that we mentioned briefly that is starting to come into her own a little bit more, or at least we're being allowed into who this person might be, is Nora, and she is the girl who originally bites Okazaki and turns him, and she lets him live, because I guess apparently in this world, when vampires feed, they usually kill their victims, because that way they kind of cover up their crime and they, less apt to get caught. And when Okazaki is out, and he's out one night, he's returning, I think, a DVD, right, to the DVD store in town. He's on his bike, and then this young girl comes flying down out of nowhere and knocks him down and then bites him. But then she says something to the effect of, I can let you, do you want to die, or do you want to be like me? And he doesn't want to die, and so he chooses to be like her, not even knowing what he is agreeing to. He learns that over the course of the next couple of volumes is what that actually means. But we really don't know much about Nora. But in Volume 3, and especially in Volume 4, there is more tease as to what may be her story and how she became a vampire as she is, and why she did let Okazaki live and gave him that choice at the beginning. Mm-hmm. But a character, we haven't discussed yet, and I think that she's quite interesting as well, and that is someone that at first I thought was going to be the love interest of Okazaki, and that is Yukiko Gosho. And Gosho is someone, I guess, very much like Okazaki. She's not very popular. She kind of functions on the outskirts of various groups in her high school. She's a loner to a large degree, and she notices, I guess, a fellow loner in Okazaki, and so they become friends. And it's like she is forcing, or definitely requiring, Okazaki to open up to her, because Okazaki seems to be a closed-off individual. And so she keeps pushing him to be himself, to tell her what's going on, even if it may be uncomfortable for him. But now with the complication of Okazaki having turned into a vampire, that kind of leaves Gosho at a distance, right? And so she's wondering, why is he pulling away? Why can't I find him? What's going on with him? And so I'm wanting to know more about this character, Gosho. I mean, what is it? I mean, we know there's something about Okazaki that reminds her of her dead brother, because she tells him almost from the beginning. But other than that, we really don't know that much. And so I guess in future volumes, we'll also learn more of the story behind Gosho.
Yeah, Gosho is an interesting character. I know reading particularly the third and fourth volumes, I was reminded a little of Junji Ito. There's a number of panels where Oshimi draws characters that appear like they're melting. And it really put me in mind of Junji Ito's Dissolving Classroom, I think is the name of the volume. And but you mentioning Gosho, it made me think that there was a kind of thematic similarity a little between Ito's work and Oshimi's here. And that you have these characters like Gosho or like Yuuki, or even at times like Okazaki, who have these kind of inexplicable fixations. They have their kind of pet obsessions that their every action seems to resolve around. For Yuuki, it's his kind of strained relationship with his mother. In Gosho, she seems to be obsessed with Okazaki because of her experiences with her brother that she explains. I think in the second volume is when she explains it. But she does kind of she latches onto Okazaki and tries to obsessively protect him in this really interesting way. But yeah, like you, I it'll be interesting to see how that that character and like you said, she is isolated literally from the other characters by the end of this fourth volume. So how she kind of her divergent sort of storyline, how that plays out is going to be interesting as well.
Yeah, and another thing that's unique about this fourth volume is it's also connected with Gosho because we're introduced to a brand new character, someone whose name is Sakurane. And Gosho is searching for Okazaki, and as she's searching, she comes across this guy, this kind of tall guy. He looks a little creepy, right? And so I wondered at first, is this another vampire? And he says, "Let's go off somewhere and talk privately." And you go, "Okay, what's going on here?" He's a sucker. He's gonna bite her neck, but we learned a little bit about him. He is interested in these vampires because of what happened to his sister, who was bitten and turned, and from what we can tell, died as a result. And so that's what is drawing Sakurane to Gosho is the fact that their loved ones or friends have turned into vampires, and that's bringing them together. Now, how Sakurane will be played out as a character in the volumes to come, we'll see. But he has a relatively small role in this fourth volume, but it's a promising one.
Yeah, he's exceptionally creepy looking. So
because he's emaciated,
he is. He's very emaciated. He looks just villainous. He looks like kind of like a stock villain character. But it'll be interesting to see if that appearance ends up being a sort of red herring or if that's confirmed and just how that's confirmed. Yeah, that character is so he's so strange looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get to something that you mentioned a second ago, and that is the visuals. And it's funny because I hadn't thought of Junji Ito, but now that you mention it, there is quite a bit in these various volumes of Happiness that are kind of swirly, melding, bending visuals that is Junji Ito-esque. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed, probably most about this series. We've primarily been talking about characterization, but I really appreciate the way that Oshimi visualizes the internal. And basically what he's doing here is I think he's using an expressionistic technique, and that is to show the inner psychological state in an outside manner. So, for instance, when these characters who are turning, like Okazaki and then later on Yuuki, are becoming they're falling prey to their thirst and their desire for blood, or the smell of blood kind of sets them off. What happens is the environment around them, the way that their world is drawn, and not just like the walls and the desks and chairs, but also the background, right? Like the sky. starts to bend and twirl to where it becomes very much like I couldn't help but think of Starry Night. Mm-hmm. Right, because there are various examples where they're looking up at the sky, and whatever lights they see turns into some kind of Van Gogh-ish dream or nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely I definitely had the same kind of sort of comparison. There's a number of panels where it did kind of put you in mind of Starry Night. I don't want to make too many comparisons to Junji Ito. There was just that one sort of thing of his, because Oshimi's aesthetic is so strange and interesting. I really had a difficult time kind of thinking of or conceiving of antecedents to his work, because it is so unlike other manga that I've read. You know, there's elements of that is sort of similar to Hiroaki Samura, who we've talked about on the show before, but it doesn't quite look like that. You know, you mentioned that it's expressionistic, and at times it certainly is. There's a number of scenes in Volume 4 where it reminded me more than anything else of like a Ralph Steadman painting. You know, it just totally like strange and psychotic looking. And then other panels and pages, and some of the kind of chapter break illustrations reminded me a little of like Bill Sienkiewicz. You know, it's just such a strange look, but like you, I totally loved. My favorite thing, you know, I think I've been pretty effusive about Oshimi's writing in this series, but for me, the best part of this was his drawing. I think I tweeted about a couple days ago from when we were recording this about it, and I said that he was drawing his ass off in a number of these chapters. I think chapter 8 is in the second volume, and that whole thing when Okazaki, he tastes blood for the first time, and like you said, Oshimi kind of has he reverts to a sort of expressionistic kind of hyperbolically stylized look to represent the way the world appears through Okazaki's eyes. And then later he does it with a number of other characters as well. But in this chapter, Okazaki tastes blood for the first time, and you see his whole world like literally kind of like change before his eyes. And that aesthetic shift is so striking, and just the way that chapter looks is so dynamic and energetic, and there's a kind of anxiety and urgency to Oshimi's lines that I think really comes through in those scenes of violence. Though it's pretty present in the energy of this of pretty much every panel, and that heavy cross hatching that you get in a lot of the pages. But yeah, I was totally taken with the way he draws this comic.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned chapter 8, which appears in the second volume, because that's what I was thinking of as well as an example of this stylized treatment of the inner state, especially as it relates to violence, let's say, you know, violence done to Okazaki and the violence that Okazaki ends up doing to others. Now, the context for and even we see this at the tail end of chapter 7. The context here is that by this point, Okazaki and Yuuki have become friends because Okazaki basically stood up for Yuuki when he was being bullied by some, real hoodlums, right? And these are real troublemakers. And what Okazaki does, and I think this is in the first volume, is he ends up hitting the group leader and stuns him, and so the group just decides to retreat. Well, you know, that group of hoods, they hold it against Okazaki. And so what they end up doing is luring Okazaki to this, kind of dark location, and they use his friend Nunoda to do so, right? They bully and threaten Nunoda, to where Nonoda is going to call Okazaki and say, hey, you have to come out here and help me. I need you right now. Come on out here. And so when Okazaki gets there, Nonoda runs away, and those bullies show up and start really beating the crap out of Okazaki. And at the very end of chapter 7 and the beginning of chapter 8, which you were referencing, you have not only that kind of almost surreal, expressionistic treatment of the changing of Okazaki that he goes through, right, internally. You know, when he's being hit, we know that he's about to manifest at least certain powers that he has as a vampire. But there are also other ways that Oshimi represents this. And I'm looking in particular at a couple of pages, and one is on 82 and 83, and this is when the bullies, you know, Okazaki headbutts the leader of the bullies and makes him bleed, but then this bully beats him with his foot while he's down, and we see a 2-page spread of Okazaki, or at least I'm assuming it's Okazaki, and he's drawn in an ink wash, which is really different from the kind of art that we're used to seeing in this story. And it's like a simple stick figure, right? It's just a simple straight body with circles for eyes and a mouth and nostrils. And we can tell that something's going on there, and he's falling to the ground because we see the word thump. But the way that Oshimi draws this, I mean, it is a stark shift in his style from either side, right? From the pages before and then the pages after.
Yeah, it's like a bolt of lightning is running through his body. That double page spread is unreal. It's so good.
And then a few pages later, we have another double page spread that does something quite similar in that when he's being beaten, when violence is involved here, there is another abrupt shift in the style from the kind of swirly, expressionistic, surreal, however you care to describe that, to something a little more simple where, and this what pages 92 and 93, where we have Okazaki lying down screaming. And again, he's drawn in kind of a very simplistic way, although these black lines are kind of emanating, these fine black lines are emanating from his face and his body. So something is going on here. And it's just another way that Oshimi momentarily changes his style for effect.
Yeah, it's I mentioned there's a kind of anxiety to a lot of his lines, but it is worth noting that Oshimi is a pretty versatile artist, as noted by those pages where he's able to very clearly utilize a completely different set of physical tools to create these pages. In that case, it was like ink washes, but then you see him using like ink washes and brushes in what most manga would be like the full color pages that start each volume. Here he has like ink washed pages that are just really lush and beautiful and soft, and it's the same kind of look that you get on these the covers, and just the juxtaposition between this very rough and scritchy and pointed and angular sort of line for most of the book, and it's also this kind of has these moments of just beautiful, soft lushness. It's a really interesting kind of contrast between those two textures and looks and feels. I was just really, really taken with Oshimi's the kind of general aesthetic of his look, but then also you mentioned like those moments where there's a kind of radical shift in his look. It's so kind of powerful and striking. It's just a really beautiful comic, I thought.
Right. So this is definitely one that you'll continue with.
Yeah, I definitely want to go and check out his earlier work. I was reading a little bit about Oshimi before we started talking, so I was just kind of like browsing his Wikipedia page, and there's a little kind of section, a little paragraph on his influences. And they're all like Andre Breton, Max Ernst, and I was like, that's kind of surprising because I and then Goya, and you can see that a little bit, but I was like, I mean, I wouldn't take him as like a real big surrealist head, but I definitely want to check out more of Oshimi's work. I definitely want to check out Flowers of Evil, He's apparently serializing another series right now called A Trail of Blood, which is a great title. I'd love to see whatever he draws based on that title. But apparently he also authored a series called Drifting Net Cafe a number of years ago, which is a remake of Kazuyo Umezu's Drifting Classroom, or The Drifting Classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be interesting to check out. Sounds like a little bit of a strange premise for Oshimi to be remaking an Umezu comic, especially one as kind of highly revered as that. But I would be curious to check out that as well as, like I said, Flowers of Evil, just because Oshimi is just a just terrific cartoonist. I'm just head over heels in love with the way he draws. So,
well, that's good to know. Now, I'm saying this not so much in terms of the art style, but because of the series premise. Mm-hmm. Have you read Sui Ishida's Tokyo Ghoul?
I have not. I've seen a little bit about it. I know that's a series we've talked about covering on the show before.
Possibly covering it, yeah.
But I haven't gotten a chance to really check it out and read any of it.
And the reason I mention this is, I've been keeping up with the series. I like it. I don't think it's the best thing out there, but I'm enjoying it and I'm keeping up with it. And the premise is not that different, at least in some ways, to Oshimi's Happiness, in that you have a young boy who's a little bit of a loner, a little bit on the nerdy side, who ends up having something happen to him perpetrated by a female character, and he doesn't know what's going on, and it turns him into a monster of some sort. In the case of Tokyo Ghoul, it is, as the title would suggest, a ghoul. And what happens with him is that he's attracted to this young woman, and the young woman also is a voracious reader, apparently, just as the protagonist is. I can't remember his name right now. And they're out together, and this woman is about to make her move, right? About to make a meal of this young boy, and something falls from a building. I guess they're at a construction site, and it hits both of them, and it completely kills the girl or the woman, but it almost kills the young man. And what we don't know at the time, but what you find out soon after, is that a surgeon who did the work, and at first you don't know who the surgeon is, ends up using a part of the woman who is dead, one of her organs in the boy, in order to save his life. And because he has an organ of a ghoul, he becomes a half ghoul. And as a half ghoul, he develops certain powers that even full ghouls don't have. And the thing about it is that the organ that he has is from a particularly powerful female ghoul. And so it's about his process of turning, his coming to grips with his new powers and what he is and isn't able to do, and then everything that goes along with that. So it's somewhat similar to Happiness, except if you substitute ghoul for vampire, then you get Happiness.
Yeah, I'm looking at a little bit of the art from it right now, and it looks interesting. We might have to check that out.
Well, Shea, you want to transition to the second title that we're going to be looking at this month?
Yeah, let's get into My Brother's Husband.
Yes, this is the first volume of My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame, and this is coming out from Pantheon Books. And there are a number of things about this book that I think are notable. First thing of note that I want to mention is that this is the first work of manga that Pantheon has published. And I did confirm that with the publicist at Pantheon who hooked us up with this book. Now, as our listeners may know, Pantheon is, I think, the primary trade publisher that has done more than I think anyone for any publishing house for graphic novels or for comics. I mean, there are comics publishers, obviously, right? There's Dark Horse, there's DC, all of those. But when it comes to just major trade publisher, Pantheon is the one that really started things going. I mean, they're the publisher, after all, of Spiegelman's Mouse and of Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, along with Chris Ware and a variety of other comics or graphic novels, whatever you choose to call them. But they have yet until now to publish manga. And My Brother's Husband, Volume 1, comes out next week as we're recording this, the first week of May. But it's the first work of manga that Pantheon's done. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if this is something that will tell us the direction of Pantheon, that they may publish more manga, or if this is a one-off, who knows? But I'm glad that they're doing this. Yeah,
totally. And it's interesting to see, this was translated by Anne Ishii, who's also with Graham Colbean's translated Massive, and at that was at Fantagraphics, and then at Picture Box they did. I think they both were involved in The Passion of Gengoro Tagami. So it's interesting to see, Pantheon obviously moving and publishing manga, but it's also interesting to see Ishii taking Tagami's work to these different publishers and kind of spreading them out as well. So this is certainly an interesting work for who is publishing it.
Right. Now, another notable thing about My Brother's Husband is going back to something that you mentioned, The Passions of Gengoro Tagami. Gengoro Tagami is not known as an all-age manga artist, which is what this book is. And in fact, he's kind of the opposite, right? I mean, this is someone who is primarily known as a creator of gay manga, and specifically kind of S&M-tinged gay manga. I mean, he may have done other things, but I think that's primarily what he's known for. So I find it really interesting that Pantheon, a very large, well-known publisher, is choosing to publish him, but doing so with an all-age title. So here is someone not known for all-age manga who's written a story that is all ages, but yet homosexuality is a central part of this narrative. So in no way is he sugarcoating or covering up anything here, but he's dealing with it in a way that I think could be read by literally all ages if you're able to read.
Yeah, it's, as someone who has read Massive and has read The Passion of Gengoro Tagami, this was a huge kind of change in what I was the work from him that I'm familiar with. You mentioned that his work is gay manga and it's kind of BDSM themed, but it's very violent. It is. It's pornography. It's explicit, but it is violent, and it is like. Yeah, this was this kind of like straightforward literary drama. Like you said, it is all ages. I think there's nothing content wise here that's would be inappropriate for anyone. There's stylistically, it's something that I think people who younger readers or people who aren't familiar with the comics form could pretty easily read. So it is an interesting shift, but apparently this is a pretty recent work. I think it didn't come out until 2015 in Japan. So yeah, it's definitely a change of it's not just a change of what we in kind of America are familiar with from Gengoro Tagami, but readers in Japan, I believe, it's a change in what they would have expected as well. So it is interesting.
Yeah. Now, we've talked around this story. Let's talk a little bit about the story's premise. So basically what you have in My Brother's Husband are three main characters. There's Yaichi, who is a single father. He's divorced from his wife, Natsuki, but she's still alive and she's still around, and we see her toward the last half of the book. So there is Yaichi, and then there's his young daughter, Kana. And when the book opens, Yachi is visited by this really big, burly, bear-like bearded guy, kind of the kind of characters that Tagami likes to draw, right? The kind of men that he is drawn to in his other kind of manga. And he asks for Yachi, and Yachi says, do I know you? And you don't realize it at first, or at least I didn't through the art, but it's in the dialogue that you learn that Mike, the character who visits, Mike Flanagan, isn't Japanese. He is Canadian. In other words, he's non-Asian, right? And so when Yaichi looks at him, he not only doesn't recognize the guy, but he doesn't recognize a Westerner who's at his door. And we come to find out that Mike was married to Yaichi's brother, who was gay. What's his name? Ryoji,
yeah.
Yes. And Ryoji had recently died, and Yaichi knew about that, but we get the sense that Yaichi had kind of closed the door on his brother, right? Because there's something about Yoji's gayness that Yachi couldn't put up with. It's not like he was completely homophobic, but he just couldn't come to terms with it. And so he kind of distanced his brother as a result. Of course, his brother was living overseas in Canada anyhow. And so anyway, Mike comes to visit Yachi because he feels that in doing so, he would be honoring his now dead husband, Ryoji. And then through Kana, who kind of browbeats her father into letting Mike stay with them while he's in Japan, they start to form a relationship. And so this becomes a new family, right? You have a divorced father, his young daughter, and then Mike comes in. And, Mike doesn't develop a relationship with Yachi, but they do become a threesome in that they all get along very well like a family. So they go out together, they shop together, they learn about each other. And over the course of this first volume, it is primarily Yachi learning to appreciate and understand Mike for who he is, and not just a gay man that he doesn't know how to deal with, right? And not just this gay man who married my brother, but an actual person. And not only does Yachi have to confront his own prejudices, and I think that this is where a lot of the power comes in My Brother's Husband, he has to confront certain societal norms from his culture, and not just as they deal with homosexuality.
Yeah. I mentioned that I've read The Passion of Gengoro Tagami and Massive, which collects a number of gay mangaka, not just Gengoro Tagami, but his work is included in it. But I'm not gay, but I really am a big fan of Tagami's. I enjoy reading his work, even though it's pornography whose target audience is not going to be me. There's a nuance to, I think, Tagami's cartooning and an elegance to his storytelling that I think really comes through in My Brother's Husband. I was really impressed with his ability to kind of latch onto and notice and explicate cultural difference in this way that I don't think it would occur to most or many Japanese cartoonists or many American cartoonists if they were doing a kind of reversed type of story to pick up on, and make a scene out of someone like Mike making Kraft macaroni and cheese and the reaction that this 11-year-old girl would have because it's so different. So you have things like that, things like hugging is a big thing in this. Because Mike is Canadian, he's North American, he hugs and it's not that big a deal. But Yaichi, he says, I've seen people do it in movies, but it's still strange. We don't really hug. It's for Tagami to pick up on these aspects of his culture and these aspects of cultural difference that would in real life be these kind of topics of conversation is really interesting, because he is able to kind of differentiate these two cultures in a and I think a really elegant way, and explicate Yaichi's kind of interrogation of his own. I guess it would be a homophobia. It's not a kind of aggressive, violent homophobia, but it is a kind of exclusionary heteronormativity that he finds himself having to wrestle with.
It's a passive homophobia.
It is.
Yeah.
He finds himself kind of suspicious of Mike, and he sees that attitude in others as his attitudes change towards Mike as he gets to know Mike. And he sees the kind of innocence of Kana, who hasn't kind of been acculturated to this heteronormativity, or this Japanese heteronormativity. Mm-hmm. And so Tagami's handling of those aspects of Japanese culture, and the kind of culture shock of having to engage with, your brother's husband, is, I think, handled really, really well. And it makes for a really, really enjoyable comic, I thought.
Yeah. And I like your example of the hugging, because that basically pulls double duty in this book. Because on the one hand, when Mike first hugs or attempts to hug Yaichi, there is the gay prejudice that comes across, right? Mm-hmm. So Yaichi kind of tenses up, or he wants to pull back. And we see in his thoughts, right? He's going, do I want to do this? Is there something going on here? And what complicates things even further is that Ryoji is not only Yachi's brother, but he's his twin brother, right? So there are a couple of times in the narrative in this first volume where Yachi, or even Mike, wonders momentarily, just briefly, about the potential attractiveness of Yachi to Mike, or I guess Mike to Yachi, because he looks so much like his dead husband, Mike's dead husband. So when Mike first hugs Yachi kind of almost pulls back to a bit. But also, as you mentioned, there is the Japanese cultural attitudes toward hugging, right, which aren't the same as they are in the West. And so he's pulling back, not just because of Mike being gay, but because that's just something that he doesn't do in his culture. Mm-hmm. And when his daughter Kana, who is of course much more of an innocent, says, "Yes, Mike, I'll hug you." I mean, we get to see that this is something that could be very pleasurable, that kids can do. Why not adults? Why is it that adults in this society are so distant and don't touch in the same way that, let's say, Mike and Kana are doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know really if I have much more to add to that. It's there's a kind of elegance and simplicity to, I think, Tagami's storytelling, where it doesn't, the backside of that sword is that it's, there's only so much you can say about it, and then it's kind of it's very satisfying to just leave it.
And I'm glad that you're putting it this way, because it leads to something that I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to ask you your feelings on. Now, I do like My Brother's Husband, this first volume. I don't know when the second volume comes out. I was looking up on Amazon today. I didn't see it listed. But there's one thing about this that didn't really bother me, but it almost did, because I think that the narrative at times got very close to sentimentality without crossing a line, but it came pretty damn close. In other words, there are moments when the relationship between Mike and especially Kana, but also between Mike and Yaichi, becomes a little too saccharine, a little too emotional and sweet. Or when, I think there's one part toward the last half of the novel, and I can't remember exactly where Mike is kind of reminiscing about his dead husband, and he's shown on a page by himself, sad, looking up at the sky in a way that strikes me as, again, kind of overdramatic and almost too sentimental. And there were a few occasions in this first volume where I think Tagami gets very close to the line, at least for me, of crossing into annoying sentimentality. but he pulls back, I guess, for the most part. And so there were a few moments in the text that I thought were kind of thin in pushing the emotional envelope almost too far. Mm-hmm. What did you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from on that. I don't know if I felt. I'm gonna have to go back and look at those scenes again. But I don't know if there was a moment where I felt that it was kind of like where I didn't roll my eyes or anything like that. I thought a lot of those scenes were handled well. You mentioned that it's volume 1, and it is listed on Amazon as volume 1, but I was, after I finished reading this, I was convinced that it was a self-contained book. So if there's another volume of this, it'll be interesting to see if Tagami is able to kind of to kind of keep this narrative up, because I do think that if it went on much longer, that it would wear very thin. But at least in this first volume, I thought that Takami did a good job of kind of balancing that narrative and making it affecting and enjoyable without kind of overplaying his hand.
Yeah.
It seems like he came a little closer with you.
I said he didn't cross the line. He came close.
He came close.
Yeah.
But I thought I was really impressed with the kind of nuance and elegance of Takami's writing in this series. I really, really liked how he was able to unfold the story and handle these elements of this relationship between these characters. Not just Mike and Yaichi, but Yaichi and his ex-wife, and his relationship with Kana and Mike's relationship with Kana, and touch on these, like I said, these cultural differences that might have been overlooked by other cartoonists.
It's interesting to hear you say what you said about the end of this book. You said, yeah, I know it's a volume 1, but when I first read this, I thought that, this is a self-contained narrative, right? That what we have at the end of the first volume could conceivably be the end of this story. I didn't think that, and for a couple of reasons. One, it ends on, I don't want to call it a cliffhanger, but if it's a cliffhanger, it's not necessarily an action cliffhanger. Basically what happens is Yachi is in bed and he has a dream of his daughter as she's gotten older over the years, and as she is turning into adult, she comes to him in the dream and says, I want to introduce you to someone, and he asks to who, and the older Kana says, my girlfriend, we're getting married. And at this, Yachi wakes up and then sits up, and he has kind of a surprised look on his face. And so that's how this ends. And so we're going to have something else going on after this. But I think another reason why I just assumed, this is not the only volume, that there has to be a follow-up, is that Mike is still there. I mean, here we have a classic narrative where an outsider comes in to another community, another culture, and he changes it in certain ways by engaging it, where both sides kind of grow and evolve with this relationship. But what I feel is ultimately going to happen, especially in narratives like this, is that the outsider has to go back home, right? So at some point, Mike is going to leave. Now, will he take anyone with him? We don't know that. But he's an outsider. He comes in, he changes things. And in order to be an effective outsider who changes things, then chances are he's going to have to leave in some way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that in the kind of last page where Eiichi has a dream about Kana maybe being gay, I think on the one hand, that certainly is a strange place to end the story, and you're right, it is strange that he would have ended it with Mike still being there. That hadn't occurred to me, but I did really like that last page where Yaichi wakes up and he just says, like, Kana. I thought that was an interesting kind of, not exactly, but a sort of kind of like chiasmus with his opening scene where he first meets Mike, and it's an interesting reversal of those kind of his feelings towards, or his attitudes towards homosexuality. I thought it was I actually thought it worked well as an ending because it sort of flipped his attitudes, and it made that sort of pointed in a way that I enjoyed. But you're right. I do think that it does leave it in a place where there is maybe more story to tell. But like I said, I don't know if I can picture. I mean, I like Tagami, so I would give him the benefit of the doubt, but I can't picture there being more narrative to kind of support another, 300 pages or 400 pages. Like I said, I think that I would start to feel even more like how you were feeling. I would probably start to think that the story was wearing a little thin. But it's interesting that you mentioned that Mike, the narrative being a kind of foreigner, comes to town and then sort of changes attitudes and then leaves. I hadn't really thought of it until you were mentioning about that. But have you seen, I think Antonioni's Teorama, which has been remade a couple times? It has a similar structure to this, but it's much more sexually explicit.
I have not.
But you're right. It is strange that Mike is still there by the end of the story.
Yeah. Another thing that I find effective about that ending, you mentioned that, Yachi has this dream. And then in that last panel, when he wakes up and says, Kata, another thing that does for me is that it demonstrates that Yachi, as much as he has changed throughout this first volume, hasn't completely changed, because it's one thing to accept your brother eventually, right, as being gay. It's, something else to accept your brother's husband, the title of the book, into your house and grow close to him. But his daughter, this has an effect on him when he has this dream that Kana is gay. So that last comment when he sits up and he's so surprised, that to me at least demonstrates that, he's still got quite a bit of growing to do. And I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily going to be the direction that the second volume will take. And like you, I kind of wonder, how many of these kind of day-to-day outings will Mike, Yachi, and Kana take before it gets kind of too thin, right? There's got to be some kind of complication in this second volume to make things even more dramatic, I think. But yeah, I do think Yachi still has quite a bit to learn in this narrative.
That's interesting. I can see how you might read that. I had a completely different reading of it, which is kind of a happier, more upbeat, or it gives the character of Yachi a little more credit, maybe. I read the scene as him not kind of imagining, oh no, my daughter might be gay, but as him kind of realizing that she is, like, he has grown to the extent that he is able to see that. Which,
are you saying he has gaydar?
Not that he has gaydar, but that he is, that experience where, what is his name? The kid comes out to Mike and he shares that experience with Yachi. I saw it as Yaichi experiencing that, being changed by that, and being to kind of empathize with it, and being a little more open-minded than he was at the start of the story, and coming to the realization that his daughter is or might be. So like I said, it gives Yaichi maybe a little more credit than you're reading, but I can definitely, it hadn't occurred to me to read it as more foreboding. But I can definitely see how you get there.
Right. And
I think if that's the case, that may be interesting to see how that is played out in a second volume.
And, you mentioned something that we didn't allude to, and that is members of Yachi and Kana's community are affected by Mike's visit as well. You've referenced that the older brother of one of Kana's friends, at one point early in the book, comes by Yachi's house, but then runs off when Yachi's ex-wife, Natsuki, just happens to see him when she visits. And so we don't even know who this young guy is. But then toward the end of the book, he comes back and we learn that he has heard through Kana that Mike is gay, and this young boy, feels that he's gay, but he has been really deeply, closely closeted all these years. And so he wants to come see Mike and then talk to him and then just tell him that he's gay, because he doesn't know what else to do with this information, because he can't tell his parents, he can't tell his friends. And so that's a touching moment. And then there's another part of the book where another one of Kana's friends wants to come over and meet Mike, but she can't because this little girl's mother, who has learned that a gay man is staying with, Kana's family, may be a bad influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, it's that interaction is interesting because I think it really underscores the cultural difference and the change, the effect that Mike has had on Yaichi. And when Yaichi is kind of he is upset that someone would suggest Mike, and he has that realization that, no, I thought that at first as well. I reacted that way as first as well. Is an interesting scene, and I like the way Takami plays that. I like the way that Takami forces his character to kind of have that realization and interrogate himself in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think is true to life in how people learn and they grow. They learn that, oh, I used to be bad like this. Am I still like that? Do I still hold those? How can I kind of excise those attitudes that I now understand to be wrong more completely, more fully? I really like the way that Takami played that scene. And then as we were talking about the coming out scene later in the book.
Well, two very different, but nonetheless two very engaging titles that we looked at this month. We started off with Shuzo Oshimi's Happiness. We're up to volume 4 now. And we followed that up with a discussion of the first volume of Gengoro Tagami's My Brother's Husband. So interesting things, and I think both of these are a series that both you and I are going to follow up on.
Yeah, I like both of these books quite a bit.
So it's another hit month in comics alternative manga land.
Yep.
Yeah. And if you want to have a, hit month or hit week or even a hit day, then you'll definitely have it if you get your manga at our sponsor. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, and as Shea mentioned at the top of the show, they have a lot of good manga at deep discounts. So that's dcbservice.com. Check them out right now. And then after you do get your manga there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can reach us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
You can also email us if you want to email the both of us. You can email 2guys@comicsalternative.com. If you want to email me, you can email me at shay@comicsalternative.com. And Derek, if they want to get a hold of you, what address is that?
Easily enough, Derek@comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube, which many of you already know. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com. So many ways for people to get in touch with us.
Yes, tons and tons of ways.
So continue commenting on our YouTube channel, but you can also email us, tweet out to us, post on Facebook. The social media world is your oyster.
And we love it when you guys do.
That's right. So let us hear from you. Until next month, I'm Derek.
And I'm Shea.
We'll be podcasting at you later.